Hello everyone, sorry just a minute late. I was messing with my tabs a little bit there and then accidentally closed the window that had some of my stuff on it. So, for the Barry Windsor-Smith section, I'm probably going to be having to do a little bit more searching just because I was being a bit silly. But welcome to another artist stream. You guys set up the chat. There we go. And because you guys have decided to make it a tie this time, we are going to do both Will Eisner and Barry Windsor-Smith this time. And so how we're going to do it is we're going to spend the first hour and a half on Will Eisner, and we're going to spend the second hour and a half with Barry Windsor-Smith. And also, my boyfriend is going to be crashing the stream sometime in the second half. Hi, sweetie. Buttercup is coming over to say hello. Alrighty. So, Will Eisner, where to start? So, if you have been in like the comic book community for a while, you've probably heard of something called the Eisner Award. It is like this big, it's big in the comic book community, okay? It's a big award for comic book creators, showing off some of the best, the cream of the crop, or at least in theory. Well, it's named after this guy. He was one of the earliest cartoonists. He created one of the most iconic characters out there. And he's just had one hell of a career. Alright, and we're going to go through it today, starting once again with Wikipedia. Alright. William Irwin Eisner, March 6, 1917 through January 3rd, 2005. He was an American cartoonist, writer, and entrepreneur. He was one of the earliest cartoonists to work in the American comic book industry, and his series, The Spirit, was noted for its experiments in content and form. In 1978, he popularized the term graphic novel with the publication of his book, A Contract with God. He was an early contributor to formal comic studies with his book, Comics and Sequential Art. The Eisner Award was named in his honor and is given to recognize achievements each year in the comic medium. He was one of the 3 inaugural inductees to the Will Eisner Comic Book Hall of Fame. It would be very awkward if he wasn't one of them. So yeah, you guys have probably all heard of The Spirit. He's been around since the 40s, and we'll show some pictures of The Spirit, and especially Will Eisner. He kind of perfected the art of the opening page, or like the title page, and we'll see a couple of examples of that a little later. Alright, so I bet we can get a Do you know Will Eisner? Alrighty. Let's start with this one to get a little bit more info before we begin. Oh my goodness. Skip.
You might think you know Will Eisner, but here are 12 facts you may not have known about the namesake of comics' top awards. William Irwin Eisner was born March 6th.
Holy damn, he looked like a Hollywood star back in the day. At least from this angle, yeah.
1917, in Brooklyn, New York, the son of Jewish immigrants. He would go on to become one of comics' greatest innovators and artists on such works as The Spirit and A Contract with God. He passed away at the age of 87 on January 3rd, 2005. Eisner went to high school and was friends with Bob Kane, the credited creator of Batman. Kane was the one who suggested to Eisner.
That is such a backhanded way of saying, yes, he is involved in it, and he's the only one who was credited for it for a very long time.
Who had contributed illustrations to the school newspaper, magazine, and yearbook, that he draw comics for a new comic book called Wow, What a Magazine in 1936, when Eisner was 19. WOW lasted for only 4 issues, after which Eisner and the book's editor, Jerry Iger, formed a studio, the Eisner and Iger Studio, in which they and others created pre-packaged comics for publishers such as Fox Comics and Quality Comics. Artists who worked at the Eisner-Iger Studio included Jack Kirby, Wally Wood, and Lou Vine. Eisner would often use pseudonyms to make his studio seem like it had more artists than it did, including Willis Renzi and W. Morgan Thomas.
Okay. It's kind of similar to Stephen King having to come up with new pen names because they thought he was flooding the market. So he's like, oh, but I still want to write. I got all these books. So he just came up with a new pen name and started publishing under that.
During his time at the studio, Eisner created or co-created such characters as Dollman, Black Hawk.
Oh my goodness, really? Alright, let's give OBS a minute. Maybe I need to do another update on that stupid thing. Alright, let me know if you can't hear or something funky goes on with the stream, guys.
Eisner's most famous work was creating a comic book insert for newspapers that included such strips as Mr. Mystic, Lady Luck, and his most famous creation, The Spirit, which ran from 1940 through 1952.
Yeah, this is what I mean. How he did The Spirit, and he would use the architecture around the whatever shenanigans the Spirit was getting up to in order to spell The Spirit by Will Eisner.
We already covered The Spirit at length in another video in this series. You should watch it, it's good. One of Eisner's biggest innovations was his use
like that. It looks impractical, but it's also a really, really cool way to introduce the Spirit.
Of splash pages, which are large, often full-page illustrations that set the mood or scene for a comic story. The Spirit is famous for its beautifully designed splashes, which often incorporated the logo of the strip into their design. Eisner was drafted into the Army in 1941 as the U.S. prepared to enter World War II. Eisner's major contribution to the Army was using his skill as a cartoonist to draw instructional cartoons, including a strip called Joe Dope for the magazine Army Motors.
Why is it the comic book artists got the wackiest jobs in the military?
After The Spirit concluded, Eisner would create more educational cartoons for the Army with P.S., the Preventative Maintenance Monthly, and others. In addition to creating groundbreaking comics, Eisner was also a teacher and writer about the art of comics. He would frequently lecture at the School of Visual Arts, and later wrote 2 books based on these lectures, Comics and Sequential Art and Graphic Storytelling and Visual Narrative. It was in these books that he coined the term sequential art, still used today to describe comics. Although he didn't invent the term or the form, Eisner is credited with popularizing the graphic novel with his 1978 work, A Contract with God and Other Tenement Stories.
Yeah, the term graphic novel, it was like floating around for a little while, and it wasn't made concrete until sometime in the 70s. Well, when was that date for Contract with God again? Alright, 1978, yeah, it wasn't until the late 70s when the concept of a graphic novel was taken seriously. And mostly because a lot of, especially book people, were not too happy with the cheap medium of comic books being considered a novel, because they wanted to keep novels separate from, comics separate from novels, I should say.
Most of his work after this was longer-form single-volume stories, which he continued producing well into his 80s at a rate of almost a book a year. Eisner's latter-era work focused on themes surrounding New York's immigrant population, Jewish culture, or both. Examples include The Building, Dropsy Avenue, the semi-autobiographical The Dreamer, and Fagin the Jew, a retelling of Dickens' Oliver Twist.
Oh yeah, I Guess I forgot to mention, Will Eisner is also of Jewish origin and also from an immigrant family.
Final work was The Plot, The Secret Story of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a history and refutation of an insidious anti-Semitic hoax. Comics' most prestigious awards are the Eisner Awards, named, of course, after Will Eisner. The awards have been given out at San Diego Comic-Con since 1988, and Eisner himself was a regular attendee at the awards ceremony until his death. He was one of 3 inaugural inductees into the Will Eisner Award Hall of Fame, together with Carl Barks and Jack Kirby in 1987. Eisner also won a host of awards not named after him, including but by no means limited to the National Cartoonist Society Comic Book Award 5 times, as well as a Story Comic Book Award and a Reuben Award from the NCS, placement in the Academy of Comic Book Arts and Jack Kirby Halls of Fame, and the second ever Grand Prix Award at the Angoulême Comics Festival in 1975. That's it for this episode of You Think You Know Comics. Don't forget to like this video.
Alright, so that gave us a little bit more information that Wikipedia did not. Well, Wikipedia has this whole thing about his life story, some of his earlier work, so if you really want to go through the entire Wikipedia page, you can. But we're here today for interviews, hearing straight from the man himself. So, by the way, it's in the spirit of St. Patrick's Day, I am currently drinking a Guinness, because today is a lovely day for a Guinness. Alright, so I found this interview at tomorrows.com. Alright, A Spirited Relationship. Will Eisner discusses his experience with Warren, conducted by John B. Cook. Alright. As the supreme master of sequential storytelling, Will Eisner really needs no introduction, but will attempt a suitable blurb anyways. Best known as the creator of The Spirit and writer and artist on a number of graphic novels, Will is also a passionate voice for the educational use of comics and the advancement of sequential art, the academic name he gave our art form, as a practical form of communication universally recognized and clearly understood. He is also, as Jim Warren succinctly described, a regular guy. Succinctly described, a regular guy. This interview was conducted by phone on February 1st, 1999, and was copy-edited by Will. Oh, nice. Alright. Comic book artist. You're one of the truly rare early examples of an artist who retained copyright to his work, correct? Eisner. For the Golden Age period, yes. Nobody in comic books at that time owned his own work. Oh, yeah. That goes for Siegel and Schuster and even Bob Kane. He just got a very good deal. None of them had the muscle to retain their copyright. Yeah, the copyright system was really screwed back then. Like, you think copyright is bad now. It used to be even worse back in the Golden Age. Alright, CBA. You're also recognized as a pragmatic, sensible businessman. If someone had come up with a good enough price, would you have sold the rights to do The Spirit? Eisner. Oh my goodness. My cats are going absolutely crazy today. Maybe they're also excited about the stream, are you guys? Eisner. It depends on the price. Laughs. After 1952 until 1964, The Spirit had no value as far as I was concerned. I kept the artwork for some reason, and it was just lying in storage. I am one who just doesn't like to sell his original artwork. I mean, fair enough. As a matter of fact, I kept it in a vault and held onto every one of those stories. I had 250 odd stories. In subsequent years, I've been selling off bits and pieces. As my wife keeps pointing out, she doesn't want to get stuck with them as a widow. But she doesn't know that I have no plans to go before she does. My dad is a huge pen and pencil collector, and he and my stepmom often joked that she needs to be the one to go first, because if he dies first, she's going to be the one that has to deal with his giant pen and pencil collection and all the memorabilia that comes with it. Or if they both die simultaneously, then I would have to deal with it. I'd rather not think about that. Actually, comic book pages had no value back then, though, I suppose. I would have sold the character and the art if I had a substantial offer. I doubt that I would have sold it because, now that you make me think about it, Columbia Pictures came to me between 1952 and 55 and offered to do a TV series on the Spirit. But they stipulated conditions which I felt were absolutely humiliating, so I just whacked out of the meeting. So it depends on the time and the conditions. I wonder what those humiliating stipulations were. Probably changing a few of the characters around. Or maybe they were trying to make the Spirit even more of a goofball. CBA. Is this the chronology? You were in the service from 1941-45, and then you stopped doing government work? And with the creation of your educational comic company, American Visuals Corporation, you started the PS magazine work? Eisner. When I got out of the Army in 1949 or 46, I went back to doing the Spirit, and I didn't start American Visuals until 1950, right after the Korean War started. I started the company because the Army came to me and asked if I'd be interested in reviving Army Motors, which I did, as PS Magazine. By then, I had become interested in selling the use of comics and the medium as a teaching tool, particularly to industry. It all formed together. I think I remember Linkara, a couple of his episodes where he was reviewing some comic books that were meant to be for educational purposes, and he was really laying into them. But honestly, it makes sense. I posted a picture a few days ago about the Dracula graphic novel that I had, and that was my first experience with Dracula. I had not read the original book at that time because I was a kid, but it was my first exposure to the story of Dracula, and by the time I got to the Bela Lugosi movie, I was very confused because they changed a few things around. But I guess you could say that it was comic books that helped introduce me to literature, even if in a roundabout way. And I can see comic books being used to teach, like, life skills or teaching about, I don't know, taxes or something like that. Like, comic books can be a very useful tool because some kids or adults, they just can't learn from a textbook. They just can't learn with only words. Sometimes they need some more visuals or something a little bit more engaging to keep them interested in a topic. So comic books can be a very valuable tool in that sense, which is why I had that little with the Comic Code Authority being all like, it has to be teaching proper. It's like, comic books are not, like, they can be educational, but they're not supposed to be like, it has to be this way, it has to be proper. Sometimes it just can be educational, but in a fun way, in an entertaining way. It doesn't all have to be a textbook. Alright, CBA. The first revival of the Spirit occurred in a Warren magazine, Help, number 13, February 1962, when editor Harvey Kurtzman reprinted a 7-page section. Do you recall how you were approached? Kurtzman, I assume, was a fan of your work. Eisner. Harvey called me. He said he was interested in reprinting some Spirit material. We knew each other. Harvey was a dear friend and one of the giants who added a level of quality to comics that influenced many of the cartoonists who followed. CBA, do you recall the public reception of the strip reprint? Eisner, no, I don't think it was significant. Certainly Harvey never wanted to print any more. I don't recall getting any fan mail. CBA. Then in 1965, Jules Pfeiffer, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, came out with his book, The Great Comic Book Heroes, which featured a Spirit reprint. Did that really reintroduce your character to a new generation? Eisner. It probably did, because in 1971 or 72, when Phil Soling held his July 4th comic convention, I visited it, and to my surprise, there were a lot of people walking around with the old Spirit comics sections. They were talking about the Spirit, and I remember saying to Phil, how the hell do people know about the Spirit? I thought it was dead. And Phil said, no, there are a lot of guys around who remember it. I must credit Pfeiffer's book with calling attention to the Spirit. Aw, that's actually kind of cute in a way. Apparently the birds are coming out. CBA. And the New York Herald Tribune came out around the same time? Eisner. Yes, around 1964. The Herald Tribune asked me to do a 5-page Spirit story for their comics revival article. I received mail on it, but nothing really happened beyond that. I was, at the time, very much involved with American Visuals. CBA, but since you had such an inventory of material, you still owned the copyright to. Were you looking to repackage the Spirit? Eisner. By then I had realized that the Spirit had some life left in it. Actually, I never believed that a comic strip, once it had suspended publication, would ever come alive again. So in 1966, Al Harvey of Harvey Comics decided to reprint the Spirit stories, which only lasted 2 issues. That was one of the first reprintings of the Spirit since the Fiction Horse newsstand comic books in the 50s. I included a new origin story for them, but it didn't go anywhere. The Spirit was never terribly successful on the newsstands in competition with the superheroes. Oh yeah, that's around when superheroes started to really become popular. It always did best as a newspaper insert. The Spirit was not designed for comic book readers, but for adults. That's what attracted me to the feature in the first place, because it gave me an opportunity to do what I always dreamed of doing, using the medium for more literary purposes. Maybe that's why people liked the Spirit, because he was more adult-ish. Alright, CBA. So in the children's medium of Harvey Comics, the Spirit just didn't click? Eisner. Well, they also did Simon and Kirby's Fighting American revival, and that didn't go well for them either. Perhaps the time was just not right for revivals. Well, that could be true too. CBA. Then, in the early 70s, there were some reprints of Spirit sections. Was Dennis Kitchen behind that? Eisner. Not as sections, but as a comic book project, it began with Jim Warren's books. My goodness, what is up with you? At that Phil Selling convention, I ran into Dennis, who at the time was starting an underground comic called Snarf. I think I remember seeing that. I think I've seen a few issues of that. And he asked me if he could reprint the Spirit. At that time, I was astonished that it had any value, so I said, sure, you can reprint it. There was another guy, named Gibson, I think, who did the Spirit sections in polybags. So Dennis ran a couple of Spirits, and after that I got a call from Stan Lee at Marvel, who said he wondered if I could let them restart the Spirit, not as reprints, but as a character in their comics line. What the hell was that? Apparently there's a lot of hubbub going on around here. But they wanted the license to the character. My neighbors are up to something. Yes, by that time, I was running American Visuals and another company, educational supplements, that involved producing social study enrichment materials for schools, selling it to teachers and colleagues. These were substantial companies that needed full attention. So while I was thinking about Stan's offer, I ran into Jim Warren. Well, Jim said that he'd like to run the Spirit on a reprint basis. I found that much more attractive. So I told Stan no, I would go with Warren, but that created a little bit of a problem because Dennis had already gotten an inventory of stories, so the deal with Warren included that Jim would buy kitchen sinks inventory to relieve Dennis of the investment that he made. Warren then began publishing The Spirit as a bi-monthly, and I began my relationship with Jim Warren. Honestly, it was probably for the best that The Spirit did not get picked up by Marvel because, Lord howdy, they would have absolutely changed the character around by a lot. Yeah, it was probably for the best that The Spirit did not go to Marvel. I know DC did a couple of fun comics. There was one with, by the artist of Cook. Darwin Cook did a story of Batman and the Spirit, where they were teaming up to take down not only Batman's rogues gallery, but the Spirit's enemy, too. I forget what the Spirit's enemy... Oh, the Octopus, that's right. The Octopus, that's what he was. But yeah, I think I still have that issue in my collection somewhere. Alright. CBA. Do you recall when you first met Jim? Eisner. I think I met Jim at a convention somewhere. He was stealing my employees, like Mike Plog. He would offer freelance work, which lured a lot of guys over to Warren. Mike was working on PS Magazine, and suddenly I found out that he was doing freelance work. I said, "Who are you doing work for?" He said, "Jim Warren." And then Jim and I met at that convention. I teased him about this. Of course, there was no way to stop anybody from stealing my employees. Jim said, "Well, you got the best staff of artists around town. I couldn't think of a better place to go get them from." So I said, "I'm hardly flattered by that." He then said to me, "Who owns the Spirit?" I said, "I do." He said, "Would you be interested if I reprinted them?" I said, "Yes," and we made a deal that I was very happy with. I would rather have Jim do it than Marvel or DC because I felt if I did it with them, I would soon lose any personal connection with it. So it sounds like Eisner just kind of had a very good deal stumble into his lap, and he's just like, yeah, sure, I'll take it. Seems like a really chill dude. Alright, CBA. Were you looking for the Spirit to be exposed to a more mature audience than you might have gotten in color comics? Eisner. Yes. As I said earlier, the Spirit was designed for a more adult audience. Actually, a newspaper audience. And that was the reason I got into this in the first place. I left Eisner and Iger because I wanted an adult audience, and the newspapers gave that to me. I felt doing the newspaper Spirit was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reach out and go beyond the classic 14-year-old reader. Marvel didn't offer me an adult audience, and with the hope of Warren coming out with the format that he did, I felt that I would possibly get a more sophisticated audience. But I wasn't thinking of going back to doing the Spirit again anyway. The one I did for the Herald Tribune was a one-shot. I mean, I get that. I wanted to make comics that, not like racy or anything, but something with a little bit more adult. CBA. Did DC Comics make a pitch for the Spirit? Eisner. No, I never had an offer from them at all. I never even approached them. CBA. You said in a Comics Journal interview that Carmine Infantio had also expressed an interest. Eisner: No, not the Spirit. They were interested in another thing. Carmine and Sol Harrison came to see me because they wanted to buy my educational comics business. We were publishing a series of comic books called Job Scene, in which we introduced the work ethic, so to speak, to young high school dropouts. We were using the comics medium. Carmine asked me if I'd be interested in selling or merging with DC, allowing them to acquire the company. As a matter of fact, Stan Lee had the same interest at the same time, but I was not interested. Again, probably for the best. CBA: Was this a part of American Visuals or its own company? Eisner: It was kind of subsidiary called Educational Supplements. American Visuals was the parent company. We had divisions and were publishing under different names. We were also contract publishing, doing a series of books or outfits like the American Red Cross or General Motors. Then the company expanded. It was doing very well, and we did a continuing flow of employee relations pamphlets for industrial companies. CBA: Back to Denny Colt. Was it gratifying to have material that was over 20 years old find a new audience? Okay, I'm going to see how much longer this article is. Okay, not horribly long. Alright, where was I? Eisner: Yes, it was surprising, and I was astonished and couldn't believe that this was happening. I never believed that a character that was closed down in 1952 would, 20 years later, find a new readership. That seemed to be the fate of The Spirit, anyways, because it had been reprinted in entirely 3 times here in America, and just a few years ago it was reprinted in Spain, Italy, and Brazil. So I guess what I've got there is pretty much like Sherlock Holmes, which has also survived all these years, even though it was set in the Victorian era period. Apparently, the Spirit stories are still fundamentally sound. I was telling human experience stories rather than dealing with a superhero that had a very shallow story base. Yeah, the Spirit's another one where he keeps popping up randomly, and he's still around. People still love him, even though he was made in like the 30s, I want to say. Let me know if you guys want me to do a stream about the Spirit. Or the... Wait, not the Spirit. I'm thinking of Shadow. Why am I mixing up my superheroes? It's been a long day. I've been training all day. So, I'm a little fuzzy-brained. And no, I am not buzzed yet. I've only had a few sips of my Guinness, I promise. Alright, yeah. But the Shadow is another one where he keeps popping up here and there. I don't know why I'm moving on. The CBA. The longevity may have also had to do that it was for, really, an all-age audience. Eisner. That's right. I had a very unusual situation. I was blessed with the fact that he was in the newspaper whose audience consisted of mother, father, teenager, and little kids. I could go the whole range at any time I wanted. CBA. At its height, at a comics section, how many papers were you in? Eisner. I think 19 or 20 papers. Circulation was roughly 5 million, which is not so tremendous when you consider some daily strips had 50-60 million circulation. CBA. Jim Warren is from Philadelphia, and he fondly recalls reading The Spirit in the Philadelphia Record. Did he express to you his admiration? Eisner. When we first ran into each other, he talked about how he remembered The Spirit and loved it. Philadelphia was one of the pilot cities for the section. CBA. Warren first ran The Spirit as a color section in Erie. Do you recall that? Eisner. but he went into black and white for the regular book. It's very difficult to license The Spirit in color because there are no color separation films available. They were all printed on metal plates, and those are now gone, so it's almost impossible to get the original Spirit coloring. In Europe, they recolored the whole series by European artists. CBA. Do you have a preference for color or black and white? Eisner. I prefer The Spirit in black and white. I prefer all my books in black and white, to be honest with you. I believe the black line is a more pure contact with the reader. Color tends to obliterate or interfere with the flow of the story. I try very hard to make emotional contact with my reader early and to maintain an intense relationship as the story goes on. I find that anything that interferes with that is counterproductive. I don't know, I've had my experience where, for a while I read manga, and so I'm used to black and white artwork, but I've had people tell me to my face that they can't stand black and white comics and have even turned down reading specific comics because they were in black and white, which is sad because a lot of cool comics were done in black and white, like The Crow, Monsters, and some comics have been reprinted in black and white, like The Last Temptation, which I find to be cooler than the color version, in my opinion. Maybe that's just because I read the black and white version first. CBA. Did the adding of tones bother you? Eisner. It helped some. I found that more tolerable than the color because grays added dimension to the art. CBA. Do you still have the original art from the Spirit sections? Eisner. Yeah, I think he already mentioned that. Eisner. Yes, I have most of the original art from the stories that I did, but not the ones that were done in 1942-45 while I was in the Army. I don't have any done by Lou Fine, Jack Cole, none. CBA. You supplied the proofs to editor Bill Dubay at Warren? Eisner. I gave them proofs and they made the film. What they decided to do was not to reprint chronologically the way that Kitchen Sink did it later. They did those stories on a selected basis. Bill Dubay would select a series of stories for whatever reason. How they decided, I don't know. And they ran the series erratically. I would have preferred them to be run chronologically because some of the stories did connect. I never ran a long continuity, but once in a while I'd run 3 or 4 stories that had a connection. CBA. You were listed as an editorial consultant for the magazine. Eisner. I don't remember how he listed me, but I guess I was a consultant. Financially, we were paid for a publication license to the rights for a one-time usage. CBA. Did you have any editorial input? Eisner. No, there was no need. The only thing I insisted on controlling was that I would do the covers. I would do the line drawing and somebody would underlay the coloring. For instance, one of the early Warren covers had my drawing of the Spirit running on an elevated railroad track, and Bill and Richard Corbin do the paint coloring. Occasionally he would have someone do a cover painting that I would object to. Originally we had a little brouhaha in Jim's office over a cover rendering, but we all got along very well otherwise. You see, that's professionalism. You might not get along and you might not always see eye to eye, but at the end of the day, you're making a product and you just hash it out and get the product out the door. There was one pulp cover artist who did one, and I walked into Jim Warren's office. Bill Dubay was there at the time, and I said, "Over my dead body." Okay, maybe not. I'm usually very generous with publishers. I give them a lot of room because I usually pick a publisher whose judgment I respect. So I really don't have much occasion to contradict what he's doing. But in this particular case, the cover was pretty awful, and I put a stop to it very quickly. Actually, I thought highly of Jim because he was responsible for raising the level of art in comic books by bringing a wave of Spanish artists who were brilliant illustrators. I think historians of this medium should recognize Jim for this. CBA, did you suggest to put your line drawings over Rich's colors? Eisner, yes, Jim and I talked about it. Jim had a different taste in cover art. I didn't feel that my watercolors had enough power to sell. He needed something that was brighter and more attractive. My paintings were a little bit more subtle or pastel, if you will, as you can see from the Dennis Kitchen series that I did later on. So we settled on the fact that I would do line drawings and a painter would come in and paint under it. CBA, did you retouch the art at all? Eisner, no, I never retouched the art. It was very hard for me to do that because I have a terrible tendency to try and go back to correct what I've done before. Perfectionism, man. But I did a couple of original stories for Dennis Kitchen and a cover for Snarf. And I did do the covers. We got a little bit of Eisner artwork right here. CBA. Was the Warren series successful? Eisner. For a while it was. I think the first issue sold 175,000 copies, and then it begun to dwindle. Those are big numbers. I mean, they're big numbers for us looking back on it now, considering that current comic book con numbers are not so great. CBA. Coinciding with the Solin cons, did you perceive a resurgence of interest in your work because of the Warren magazine? Eisner, you mean people calling me up to hire me for something? The answer to that is no, because during the Solin convention, I was still a busy CEO of an educational publishing company in Connecticut. After I sold the company, I decided to go back to writing and drawing. I started doing graphic novels. I didn't want to do any more, I started doing graphic novels. I didn't want to do any more publishing. First, I did a couple of satirical books, Gleeful Guides. They were a series of 4 books. It was a fun thing. A Contract with God came after that. It was the first graphic novel. And as we discussed, it's not like he came up with the word, he more popularized it. CBA. Were you sensitive about the reception Ebony would receive in the 70s audience? Oh, the Ebony White controversy. Okay. Alright. We have to bring him up because Ebony White is a very controversial aspect to the Spirit. So, Ebony White was the sidekick to the Spirit, and in the original Spirit magazine, he looked like this. So, yes, he was a caricature. And, that's just how it was back then. Alright, there's a few more that are slightly more dignified. Like they toned down the lip thing here. But nowadays, whenever they republish a Spirit comic, they usually have Ebony White just look like this because, yeah, it's not okay to do that stuff anymore. So, alright, I'm very curious to hear his answer about this one. Alright, Eisner. Look, I was never apologetic for the way I depicted Ebony. As a matter of fact, I was very comfortable with the way I did it. Remember, Ebony was created in the 40s, and at the time, you still had Amos and Andy. That sort of humor was prevalent and acceptable at the time, but I always treated Ebony very differently. As a matter of fact, I received very good mail. Even in the Warren books, you'll see some supportive letters. This is not widely known, but I was probably the first to have a black detective, Detective Gray, who did not speak with the minstrel dialect. I treated Ebony very lovingly for a long time, and I was no more a promoter of civil rights. I never thought of myself as being involved in the civil rights movement. Then I was a feminist creating strong, intelligent women. These were my standards. These were the kind of people I liked and admired. I think that's a very classy answer to that. CBA. At the core, your characters are human. There is a true humanity about them. What I mean is, were you sensitive that Ebony would be misinterpreted, as he ended up being to some degree? Eisner. Oh yeah, I got mail from both sides. I got a letter from the Afro-American papers in Baltimore complimenting me on the way I treated Ebony. On the same day, I received another letter from a couple of fellows I had gone to high school with in my radical days when I was going to change the world, and they said I betrayed socialism because of the portrayal. Oddly, the letters both came on the same day. I should have saved them. What? How does socialism come into this? So his commie friends took offense to Ebony White, and I'm going to assume if that because they were your school friends that they were all white, but the Afro-American papers in Baltimore, who I am assuming were mostly run by black people, were completely okay with Ebony. That's the Speedy Gonzales controversy that happened like almost a decade ago, where everyone on the left was bitching about how Speedy Gonzales was a bad representation of Hispanic people, but when they tried to get rid of Speedy Gonzales, the Hispanic population's like, hey, where's Speedy? We loved Speedy. Bring back Speedy. So, that is pretty funny. Though, I think I've mentioned it on these streams before, but when I was doing that interview with RJ and John's Longbox, John mentioned that they were going to do a restoration or like a reprint of the old Spirit comics, and the question that the publisher gave to the fans was, hey, do you want us to tone down Ebony White? Do you want us to tone down his appearance for the comic book because he was an offensive racist caricature? And the fans responded with no, because if they wanted the accurate historical representation of the character. And even though it is still a touchy subject to this day, people wanted what was there already. They didn't want a bastardization. And you know what? I think that characters like Ebony White, we still should acknowledge what they were, but we should also use them as a measure for how far we've come in comic books. And even Eisner has come a long way since Ebony White. So, yeah, the more and more I'm reading this interview, the more and more I'm liking Will Eisner just as a person, not just as an artist, because he does seem like a very jovial yet a very practical kind of man. That's what that's the impression I'm getting from this interview. And don't worry, at some point we are going to get to his artwork before we get to the video interviews. All right. CBA. What kind of man is Jim Warren? Eisner. Today, he's a lot more settled down than he was when I met him. When I knew him as a businessman, he was a lot more feisty and a little bit more aggressive than he seemed to be today. But then, of course, we all age. At the time, I enjoyed working with him. He and we had a lot of business arguments. The problem for Jim was that I write my own contracts because I had a certain amount of business experience. So he was dealing with me not quite the way he dealt with other artists. Translation: oh shit, you're an artist who actually knows how business works. Fuck, I can't pull the wool over your eyes. But we got along very well. As far as I'm concerned, he was a fine person who I enjoyed working with. Other people had tough things to say about him. Wally Wood was unhappy with him and couldn't get along with Jim. But then again, Wally Wood was a difficult person himself. But there are always three sides to every story. But as I said earlier, Jim should be credited with publishing books with a high art standard. CBA. The Spirit lasted 18 issues with Warren. Was the shift, retaining the sequential numbering, immediate over to Kitchen Sink? Eisner. It happened almost immediately. Dennis had originally done those couple of spirits before Warren, and by the time the Warren Spirit continued, Dennis had built his little publishing company into something a bit more substantial. He said he would like to continue the Spirit, and I said, fine, I'll go back with you. CBA. So though it only lasted a few years, the relationship with Warren was beneficial? Eisner. Yes, it was very beneficial, and the book ran as long as he could sell enough copies to keep it worthwhile. We got along very well, and we're still friends today. I saw him in San Diego last year, and we had a good time. We keep in touch. Aw, I really liked this interview. Alright, so yeah, as always, I am going to post this link down below for you guys to see for yourself. But before we get to the video interviews, let's get to Will Eisner art so we can see all the wonderful stuff he has created. Ooh, yeah. Like, this is what I was talking about. The cover, where the spirit would be in perilous trouble and the enemy's around, and of course the enemy now is like a bunch of sexy women. Alright. Let's get to the images. He does have a lot of different graphic novels. Oh, Jesus. I cannot afford that. Alrighty, so ignoring the price. Like, his art is kind of cartoony, but it's also very detailed, and it kind of looks depressing. I'm guessing a lot of his artwork, it does kind of deal with difficult subjects, and as it was mentioned in that video, he dealt with like city issues and human issues and stuff that immigrant families would be going through. So I'm sure quite a few of his works were not always happy stories, and his art kind of reflects it, where it does seem adventurous, but it also seems very dangerous and a little bit gritty. So I can see what he meant, where it's more adult, but it's not like raunchy adult. It's more, this is going to be tackled in a more adult way than in a superhero way. Not saying that superheroes can't be adulty, but that you kind of had to make it a little bit more fun. Alright. Angry Street. Aw. Aw, that's so cute. San Diego Expo 2000. And it kind of, it kind of reflects how both the older generation and the newer generation are getting into the comic, which is what he saw. And I don't know how I would feel if I would just see a bunch of people just going through my writing like that. I think it would be very strange. Oh, here's that one picture colored. There we go. Yeah, oh, and that must be the octopus guy. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I think you guys have a good picture now of what his artwork looks like, and kind of it's very fun. Like, it just screams fun and adventure, even though it is kind of dark. Like, oh, look at these poor saps down there. The Seductress. This is a magazine for adults. Well, thank you, Seductress, for pointing that out for us. Okay, so let's get into a couple of videos. We got about a half an hour left before we switch it over to Barry Windsor-Smith. Alright. Oh, I also found this interview, the Comics Journal. I guess I'll post it down below too for you guys to read if you want. But it's just another interview that happened apparently in '61. Alright, so that one's a bit too long. Alright, so this one is 2 1986 interviews. Alright, let's do this. Oh god, please tell me this has sound.
But comics, I believe, very strongly, and I'm committed personally to this, are emerging from a kind of folk literature or cheap literature to a quality literary form.
Okay.
There's certainly a distinct relationship between film and comics. I like to think of comics as a film on paper. I have always maintained that in the beginning, God made comics. Then he made film. Film is an extension of comics. Comics is an attempt to communicate with a visual form. When the Spirit began to revive in the 70s, my astonishment when Phil Suling called me up and asked me to come down to attend a convention, the first convention in New York, and I found that there were people there who were reading the Spirit. I remember Dennis Kitchen came over to me and asked me if he could reprint Spirit stories. I said, "Do you really want to do that?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, who'd be interested? The character's been dead. He's been in a box for the last 20 years. I must confess, it's a very rewarding thing. It's not every cartoonist or artist who can see a character that he created or see something he created survive to another generation.
When he said, though, before, comics are film-like and films are kind of comic-y, I agree and disagree. I mean, the way I approached writing my own comic, I just tried to imitate the natural flow of a comic book. I wasn't trying to do any, I wasn't trying to replicate a film. I was trying to make a comic because comic books have a very different flow than a film, as we've seen with comic book movies where they're trying to add their own pizzazz and panache to comic book storylines, even if they already have enough panache themselves.
The Spirit was an anti-hero because I never took the whole idea of the superhero seriously. The fact that he wore a mask was a concession I made much against my better judgment, really my instinctive desire to deal with the hero. I was looking for realism in my stories. Actually, the Spirit stories were stories in which the Spirit only played a part of it, rather than the story built around any particular strengths that he might have.
think that's that railroad scene that he was talking about earlier. Ah, the good old days.
For me, the waterfront represented a marvelous opportunity for settings. Many of the stories I did used the waterfront almost as a key to the total story. Generally, the prime action, the denouement of the story occurred on the waterfront for me, because here is where the criminals were either caught entering or escaping. And the waterfront represented that throughout the whole. I guess if you would want to summarize the position of the waterfront in all the spirit stories I ever did, you might say that it was the entrance staging area for most of the adventure stories.
Yeah, a lot of his artwork did have something to do with waterfront. I wonder where he got the inspiration to do it from, because he's, like, as you mentioned, it's like a good where the protagonist was either, or the villain was either caught at the waterfront or escaped at the waterfront. So I wonder where he got that idea, or was that like a very popular trope back then that he was just taking advantage of?
My orientation is essentially theater, that is live theater and stage set. My father was, after all, a scenery painter, and my earliest impressions,
That's cool.
theatrical impressions at any rate, came from live theater and remained with me throughout. I'm probably more influenced by my memory of theater than I am of film, because film is, after all, not really connected with a closed-in scene. It doesn't have the feel and the smell of a contained dimension.
I have heard that from theater nerds before, where the big difference between, and the big complication with adapting a theater performance to a movie performance is, with a theater performance, you kind of just imagine all the stuff that the actors are working with is there with them. Like, if it starts snowing on the stage, we all know it's probably like some paper or some sort of like effect there, but you have to imagine that it is the snow, and also the people are there in the room with you. It's not, there's no separation with the screen. Whereas in the screen, you can depict whatever the heck you want, but you lose that aspect of the actors being there with the audience. And it's a very big complication of why, especially musicals, have a very iffy adaptation reputation.
By introducing the weather elements like rain, extreme rain, or fog or snow, I can enhance the element of danger and bring to the reader a greater element of personal contact. It enables me to reach the reader a little bit more easily, emotionally.
Yeah, rain
The
does
city
the work.
has influenced my lighting, my thinking of lighting and containment tremendously. I always thought of light coming from above. All my experience has been in the city, in narrow streets where your source of light was either a lamppost or a light of the sunshine filtered down through the space between two buildings, or an alley. Strong women were things that I always admired. I was always attracted to women who were competent and skillful and people in themselves.
He likes his women to have a strong personality to go with that figure. There's
so much in a city like New York City, which after all occupies the position of being central city in most of my stories. And in the later work that I've done outside of the Spirit, the portfolio called The Big City, and then ultimately a 132-page book of vignettes of the city called The City. All of these are built around the areas of the city where all kinds of action can take place.
Chris' last name, maybe it's just popular symbol. Water being the symbol of birth and rebirth. Maybe the water flow symbolizes a restoration. Plus super cinematic. I think it's both, but maybe it leans a little bit more on the super cinematic. Because let's be real, a hard rain scene, it really drives home the feeling of either dread or sadness or something like that. Yeah, I would agree, yeah.
Stories emerge from almost any portion of a city you can think of. For example, a city throws off a tremendous amount of debris, garbage, junk, all of it left over from the city. Each of these pieces
littering
are a story within themselves. You can't even over-dramatize the fact that you can walk into a portion of the city that's partially abandoned, pick up old beer cans and bits of debris, and find a story right there on the spot. This is the element with which I work, and this makes the fiber of the large part of most of the body of my work. The city for me is really not only the setting, but the source of story material.
Finding a story, finding a dead body, same thing. It. Yeah, that's depressing. Aw, kitty.
Generally, I do not use photographic research. I try very hard to work from memory because I'm dealing with a form of impressionism. Very few of us remember things in a clear, highly detailed fashion. And most of our adventure and experiences leave the backgrounds in a form of a blur, which leave for us an impression. And this is what I try to convey. I spent around 25 years in a company that I owned, publishing and utilizing comics or sequential art as a teaching tool. I did an awful lot of those during the period between 1955 and 1970. We did a lot for the school system in the United States, and also for the...
Why is it mostly a black teenager on the cover?
Department of Defense. I first discovered the use of comics during World War II when I was involved in the training area where they had to train people very rapidly in procedural matters.
I just remembered, a lot of those kids in World War II were kids. Like, freshly 18, or maybe they lied about their age to get into the war. Like, a lot of the men who were drafted into the war were kids, basically.
And I've discovered...
That is super depressing.
That I had a tool in my hand that was very, very useful, and it worked beautifully. Poorhouse Press was a publishing company I started shortly after I sold my educational publishing companies. That was an attempt on my part to publish books that nobody would publish. Gleeful Guys was just a series of humorous books I felt I wanted to do sometime, and I did them.
Aww.
Over the last 6 or 7 years, I've produced something like 4 or 5 graphic novels. Graphic novel generally takes me about 1.5 years to do. from writing stage to actual execution. I work fairly fast, but I spend a lot of time in thinking out a story and working out the plot. Contract with God, and particularly Life Force, which I've just completed, as I said, is built on a historical frame. It's an attempt to tell history of life in the city, particularly in the Bronx, in the middle 30s during the Depression, which is a very interesting period of time, not necessarily exciting.
Yeah, I think exciting is not the right word to describe the Depression. I think depressing would be a much better word to describe the Depression.
But a very interesting period of time for me because I lived through it. As far as the employment of Jewish culture, this stems from the fact that I'm more familiar with Jewish culture than I am with any other culture. And
I mean, if you weren't familiar with Jewish culture, I would be asking a couple of questions, considering you come from Jewish immigrants.
I employ it because it's something I know and I understand.
America looks for answers after the space shuttle explodes in a ball of fire.
Coming up, the experts try to explain this country's worst space disaster.
Life on Another Planet was a political statement. There's no question about it. I had a political statement in mind, and it's very rare that I have been doing anything but social commentary. I've always seemed to me have been in a teaching posture because I ran a studio largely composed of new artists, people who have come in from other fields. Back in 1938, when I started Eisner and Barry, most of the members of that studio were people who came from other fields. They were painters who found a job in comics. They were illustrators who found a job in comics. So I was always teaching, it seemed to me, along with getting production. As far as the...
How cool would it have been to attend one of his lectures? I'm a writer, obviously, I'm not an artist, but even I would be super interested into being in one of his lectures. But I was 10 when he died? Yeah, I was 10 when he died, so yeah, too bad for me.
The whole idea of teaching a new generation, I find it very exciting and very important from a selfish point of view, from a career selfish point of view, because the more people I feel that get interested in this field and approach this field seriously and professionally, the better will be the product.
Depends. I mean, if we've seen in the last 5-10 years, getting a bunch of new people in the comic industry who at least claim they're interested in being the comic industry hasn't exactly gone too well. We're not getting into that right now, no.
Opportunity came along and someone bought the company out from under me, and I then decided I would continue on as doing my own creative thing. I remember sitting in the kitchen talking to my wife, and she said to me, "Well, what are you going to do now?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. Maybe I'll find another publishing company and start a new publishing company." She said, "Why don't you do what you always said you were going to do? Here's your chance to either put up or shut up." So I always used to say, one of these days I'm going to get rid of all this business stuff and settle down and write and draw. Well, I did. I bought a house in White Plains and with a studio next door, and began writing and drawing. Now I'm in Florida doing the same thing. And
that is such a wife thing to do. Hey honey, I've been doing all of this stuff for all these years. What should I do next? How about you do the thing you said you've been wanting to do for the last 30 years? I mean, I don't think I would ever become that wife, but at the same time, I never thought I would become a lot of things. So there's always the possibility.
Enjoying myself.
Well, I'm glad he did get to do what he wanted. It probably helps that he was a smart guy who not only was knowledgeable on how to tell a story, but also was knowledgeable on the business side of things. So he couldn't be taken for all he was like other artists were. So his story was among the happier stories compared to. Well, Cody had it okay, but Ditko especially did not have a very good time after leaving Marvel and kind of sort of getting screwed over by Stan Lee. But we are not talking about Ditko again. We are not going on another rant about Ditko again. Okay, let's see if we have anything else. Because I found a couple of other interviews, but yeah, this one is 30 minutes long, and Alright, so this one's part 1 of 3 with Will Eisner talking about the spirit. Should we give it a go? I guess we might as well. Because we have until 8 to switch over to Barry Windsor-Smith. And sorry about all the commotion you heard in the background. I cracked open another can of Guinness and it decided to just bubble over. Oh, I really gotta do something about this drinking. Sorry about that again. Okay. So, this is Prisoners of Gravity, Will Eisner and the Spirit, part 1 of 3. We're probably not going to finish all of it, but we'll at least get part 1 of it.
Aha! Never mind that. Let's watch this.
I started out dreaming of being a writer, and then I wanted to be a painter. But I was good at neither one. So what I did is take 2 ineptitudes and make 1 aptitude. I really, suddenly it came upon a field which was there waiting for the talents, however limited, that I had.
Well, we've been exclusively doing Will's work. He's a giant in the field. This, I think, is his 55th year doing comics.
That's Dennis Kitchen? Why does he look like a kind of nerdier version of Freddie Mercury?
They're at the birth of comics, and he's somebody who not only spans the history of comics, but he's been an innovator all the way. He's been someone that other cartoonists mimicked and looked to for inspiration.
Charles Schultz may be richer and Garfield may be better known, but Will Eisner was the best of the first and the first of the best. So happy 50th birthday to the Spirit from Commander Rick. Hit it, Nancy.
What is this show?
Anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe has voted English-only sign. 40,000 tons of armed with PCBs blew up the ozone layer today.
This operates like a YouTube video. But this thing was clearly made in the 80s.
Standing by for solid rocket booster separation.
Wait, is this what you, Gen X comic readers were watching back then?
Greetings down there on Earth. This is Commander Rick, hijacking your signal from my perch high up in space. You know, living up here in a communication satellite, watching TV all day, I've realized we live in an age of excess. Well, you live in an age of excess. I'm stuck up here drinking. A better question might be why. In 1940, when Will Eisner created the Spirit, life was a lot simpler. And in the 50 years since, everything has changed. Everything. Technology, society, morality, religion, the family, housing has changed. But there is one thing that has not changed. We have the same bodies. These are the same bodies and the same brains, basically, that we've had for tens of thousands of years. And that's why after 55 years in comics, Will Eisner remains on the cutting edge, because he writes about that one constant, that one thing that never changes, human beings. And that's why we have to talk about him today.
Comic books began in 1935 when some very enterprising publisher put together daily strips, pasted them together into a magazine format, 8.5 by 11 size format. And the title was Famous Funnies. It became very popular, sold very well, and a lot of publishers followed it. And that gave way to the production of original art material, original stories, which gave me my start in my career. That's where I came on the scene.
Will Eisner and I went to deal with Clinton in the Bronx together, and we were on the Clinton News.
Oh!
And Will Eisner got more of his drawings in the Clinton News than I, and I was always jealous of that. And he was a better artist than I, and then...
You're not the artist, you were the writer. Bill Finger was the artist. What the hell, dude? You couldn't even say you were the writer. Okay.
Ironically and prophetically, he left, graduated, and I won an art scholarship to an art school in New York at the Flatiron Building for 2 years. And
okay, now this is gonna bug me. Kane. Okay, so he was an artist. Alright, so he was an artist, but it's like... Alright, so I stand corrected. Fine, I'm sorry, Mr. Kane.
so I was doodling, and then on the side I was trying to crack the cartoon market, and he went into partnership with a fellow called Jerry Iger. It became Eisner and Iger.
I formed a partnership with Iger. I was 19 years old at the time after having... and we saw the audience then as juveniles. We call them 10-year-old kids from Kansas City. The main thrust of comics at those days were aimed at children, at youngsters. The stories were simplistic stories. Generally, they were imitations of the classic adventure stories. Some of them were imitations of the daily strips that were prevalent of the day, because in those days, adventure, continuity, daily strips dominated the story field. But there was one other ingredient that I saw as a tremendous opportunity, which gave me a source of material, and that was the pulps. The pulps at that moment were dying. I don't know if you remember what the pulps were, but the pulps were the forerunner of what you see today as paperbacks. They contained short stories, some of the great short story writers with illustrations. I brought that idea into the comics we were doing at the time. But it wasn't until the Spirit days that I began doing more adult material. Register and Tribune Syndicate in Ireland wanted a what they called in those days a costume character, and what we call today superhero characters. Superman had begun to make its name and was getting very, very popular. Batman had just arrived. they felt that that was the thing they wanted to have. They wanted to get somebody to give them a superhero character or a costume character. Well, I didn't want to do that. All I wanted was a character that would give me a detective story, rather, that would give me the opportunity to write the kind of stories I would like to write.
It's kind of funny that he considers like the domino mask to be the compromise. It's like, we want a superhero story, fine. Draws a detective with a domino mask. Happy? Sure.
And it required then a character that had dimensions to it. But to accommodate them, I said, okay, I'll give him a costume. And I put a mask on his face and a pair of gloves and this blue suit. The mask ultimately was really one of the biggest problems I have had in all the years, because to show a man walking down the subway talking to people wearing a mask and nobody paying any attention to the fact that, you know, it was total idiocy, but it worked for a while.
When the Spirit came out, it was different, really different. And it was an insert in a magazine. There were 7 pages inside on sepia. And it was an expensive magazine because they were buying these reprints. And I was going to elementary school, and it came out Wednesdays. And was the only day that I skipped the bus, because the guy will deliver the comics to the door of my neighbor, which could afford them, put them in the doorsteps with a newspaper and everything. And I will hide on the steps until the delivery man will leave. Then I will read the Spirit, put it back, and run all the way to school. And I arrived probably an hour late. But like every Wednesday, I arrive an hour late. The teachers thought it was something that I had to do at the house, so I never got caught by anybody. That was how important it was to me. It was a routine. It was a ritual for me to read the Spirit. First, because there were 7 pages. They were finished. They were concise. They had a beginning, a middle, and an end. The characters were totally developed. They had a lot of humor and a lot of adventure and a mystery. And it was an era that it was still very close. As the Space and the Moon is to the new kids, that field of mystery was alive in the 40s. It was just after the war.
I think the Spirit also still has that pulp spirit, or has that pulp, yeah, for lack of a better word, spirit to it. Because the pulps were meant to be just like easily consumable, quick entertainment, and that, from what I can tell, the Spirit, that's pretty much what he was, just quick, fun entertainment that you just read when you're like drinking your coffee before going to work. And for what it was, the fact that it has survived all this time is quite fascinating, really. Alright, it is almost time. Gotta check something real quick. No message from the boyfriend just yet, so... Alright, so Bill Finger was... Yeah, alright. Okay, so it's about time to switch over to Mr. Barry Windsor-Smith. Yeah, I had the tab open earlier, but for some stinking reason, I was trying to click on one thing and it went to close out the page. So that's why I was like a minute late. Sorry, I was 1 minute late to my own stream. Okay, so now it is 8 o'clock. We are going to switch over to Barry Windsor-Smith. Now, I am far more familiar with Barry Windsor-Smith's work than with previous... Well, I knew of their work, obviously, but as far as, like, reading it and actually knowing it, I'm a lot more familiar with Barry Windsor-Smith than with the others. So... like always, we shall start with Wikipedia. Barry Windsor-Smith, born as just Barry Smith, and the 25th of May, 1949, and he is still alive and kicking. Alright, he is a British comic book illustrator and painter whose best-known work has been produced in the United States, like most British comic book illustrators. He attained he attained working on, I think it's supposed to be notoriety, or attained, I don't know what that sentence, working on Marvel Comics' Conan the Barbarian from 1970 to 1973, and for his work on the character Wolverine, particularly the 1991 Weapon X story arc. His other noted Marvel work included a 1984 Thing story in Marvel Fanfare, the Life, Death, and Life, Death 2 stories with writer Chris Claremont that focused on the depowered Storm in Uncanny X-Men, as well as the 1984 Machine Man limited series with Herb Tripp and Tom DeFalco. Alright, after leaving Marvel, Windsor-Smith became the creative director and lead artist at Valiant Comics, where he illustrated the company's revival in the 1960s Golden Key Comics character Solar, and created the original characters Archer and Armstrong. He was also the chief designer in the Unity crossover storyline. After leaving Valiant in 1993, Windsor-Smith did work through a number of publishers, including co-creating the vampire character Rune with Chris Alm, which was published in parts of Malibu Comics Ultraverse. Rune's adventures included a crossover with Conan that Windsor-Smith wrote and illustrated. Oh, he was allowed to do that? Alright. He also provided art for the Wildstorm Productions Image Comics storyline, Wildstorm Rising, though he later came to regret that work. I wonder why he came to regret that work. Well, Wildstorm nowadays has kind of an iffy reputation from what I understand. So maybe I understand. Though he later came to regret that work. He subsequently created an oversized anthology series, Barry Windsor-Smith Storyteller, through Dark Horse Comics, though it was canceled after 9 issues. Aww. Well, that's dumb. Alright. Windsor-Smith released his subsequent work through Fan Graphics, including the Storyteller spin-off, Adastra in Africa, which had originally been conceived as a Life Death 3 story for Storm, 2 volumes of the retrospective hardcover books Opus and Monsters, a 360-page hardcover published in 2021 that had originally been conceived in the mid-'80s as a Hulk story. In 1922, Barry Windsor-Smith won Eisner Awards for Best Graphic Novel, or Best Letterer, and Best Writer-Artist for Monsters. And I have Monsters sitting on my shelf right now. It is a big boy. It is a big tome. And it is also very, very dark. But, alright, so there is the base work for Barry Windsor-Smith. And should we start with, what do you guys think? Should we start with videos, or should we start with interviews? Alright, Strip Panel Naked. I appreciate what they do, but that's not an interview, so I can't exactly do anything with that. Alright. This NPR article is... Oh, it's not that long. Okay. Alright, so this one's not that long. I was a little worried because the icon down over here looked really small, so... Alright, so here is an NPR interview from 2021, so fairly recently compared to the other interviews we've done. Alright, so down we go. Alright, comics hero Barry Windsor-Smith is back, and he's brought something monstrous. Maybe you grew up reading his Conan the Barbarian comics and thrilled to the vigorous lines of his X-Men titles over the years. Maybe you were dedicated by his dreamy, intricate fantasy paintings in the 70s, or discovered his work in the Opus retrospective volumes of 1999-2000. But even if you didn't do any of these things, you should still take a minute to see what Barry Windsor-Smith, Eisner Award Hall of Famer, genre-shaping fantasy artist, and 50-year veteran of the comic book industry, has been up to for the last 3.5 decades. Yeah, this turkey took a while to cook. Ever since the 80s, he's been drawing, redrawing, and refining one graphic novel, and he's finally released it into the world. The 365-page Monsters is a harrowing tale of a man who's subject to a secret government experiment that transforms him into something terrifying. Windsor-Smith uses his vast canvas to explore wide-ranging questions about the nature of humanity and the scope of individual responsibilities. I reached out to him via email to get his opinions on comics, art, and his magnum opus. Alright, so I'm guessing the bolded sections are the questions, and the non-bolded sections are going to be the answers. Alright. Interviewer. When I was doing research for this interview, every article I read mentioned Conan the Barbarian in the first paragraph. I even found an NPR story from 2008 about how Conan was one of President Obama's favorite comic books when he was growing up. Oh, really? Did not know that before. How does it feel to have created something that lives so vividly in people's hearts after so many decades? Barry. It's very gratifying. Each generation has its own preferences and special favorites. Conan was from the 1970s. There are fans who remember other works of mine from different periods. My creation of Weapon X is from a little more than 20 years ago, yet I still receive fan mail telling me how important the story was to them. Go away, Outlook. I don't like you. Alright. Interviewer. Weapon X seems thematically similar to Monsters in that Wolverine, like Monsters' Bobby Bailey, is dehumanized by a bunch of scientists who see him only as a subject. Why do you think you're drawn to this scenario? Do you worry about how scientific arrogance affects society? Barry. No, I'm not that socially conscious. It's just a cool story, bro. The fact is that I was writing Monsters during the same period I was creating Weapon X. It often happens that ideas or imagery from one project might migrate into another. Both the professor and Oscar Friedrich had their left hand cut off, for example. Miss Hines and Janet Bailey are both strong but otherwise beleaguered women who only mean the best but are hard done by. I don't know, Miss Hines, I'm not saying she deserved what happened, but it's like you just sat back and watched Wolverine get tortured, basically. I would not put her on the same level as Janet Bailey, who was a battered woman trying desperately to protect her son. But yeah, it was reading Weapon X, it's like, holy crap, this is basically just Monsters, when in reality Monsters was basically Weapon X. And it's probably one of those things where he just really liked the story, and so he's like, you know what, I'm just gonna do this again. Which, alright, sure, buddy. Interviewer. Comics, both the medium and the industry, has changed a lot since you drew Conan in the early 70s. Do you think there's more or less room for creativity and innovation today than there was back when you got started? Barry. In the 1970s, there were just two big companies producing comic books. Marvel and DC were pretty much the only game in town if you wanted to make a living at comic books. These days, though, there are dozens and dozens of small press publishers who have links to the major distributors. Artists can flourish creatively without needing to sign the restrictive contracts foisted upon young talent by Marvel and DC. Yeah, that has been a little bit of a bugbear for me as far as Marvel and DC. I appreciate them for what they are, but it is a little frustrating that they were just like the big two for so long that it kind of quashed any other publisher, or they just bought out other publishers. Alright. Interviewer. You got the idea for Monsters 35 years ago. Is the final book significantly different from your initial vision? Barry. I worked on Monsters for many years, and I rewrote and redrew it countless times. I created characters that were strongly defined whose personalities began to take over the story. I had to have faith that their wishes and desires were the key to creating a good story. The central monster is the least developed of the cast. He doesn't speak, for example. It's the people that surround him that drive the continuity. I wouldn't say that Bobby is least developed. I think it's better to say that Bobby was the catalyst to uncover decades and decades of abuse and government overreach and all that jazz. He is the focal point of revealing all of the sins of the past and making everyone who has done wrong finally have justice dealt upon them. And by everyone involved, I mean Dr. Friedrich. Alright. Interviewer. That silent yet pivotal figure is Bobby Bailey, a mentally damaged young man who's subjected to a government experiment that horrifically disfigures him. How did you decide that he doesn't speak after the procedure? Did your concept of his character evolve over the years? Barry. The monster was never fully verbal. At first I had him grunting in responses to others. The grunts stayed in the speech balloons on the artwork for many years, and I grew increasingly uncomfortable with the comic bookiness of it all. Due to the ever-lengthening time in production, the original art paper turned a dingy yellow, and the glue holding the balloons and captions atrophied to the point where all the paste-ups fell off hundreds and hundreds of pages. Not much good came of this except my noticing that with the grunt balloon having fallen to the floor, the panel of the monster that I had never found convincing looked just fine as a silent shot. So it's like just kinda sorta circumstance that it ended up that way. That's interesting. Interviewer. Your dense, detailed style in Monsters is quite different from most comic art, which is usually much more minimalistic. Some comic writers have argued that it's the nature of comics to boil everything down to as few lines as possible. Is your style a deliberate rebuttal of this idea? Barry. I hardly care what comic theorists think. I drawn stories in the simplest of fashions, just plain and simple outlines that suggest reality rather than define it. I've created stories with high detail, like a pre-Raphaelite painting. Boiling comics down to simplicity is fine if you are producing a simple narrative. Monsters is realistic and complex, and is therefore rendered that way. I hardly care what comic theorists think. Translation. Just let me make my frickin' art. Gonna light some more stuff on fire. Mm-hmm. Alright, so this one we're probably going to skip. Alright, let's see just how long this guy is. Some more Barry Windsor-Smith artwork. Ooh, this is a very long one. Alright, so how about I just put this one in the description. And before we move on, how about we take a look at some of Mr. Windsor-Smith's artwork, so you guys can get a better idea of who we're talking about. Alright. Artwork. Okay, so alright, so this is a Conan, and I think the best way to describe Barry Windsor-Smith's style is it's very beautiful, but also very brutal. Like, look at this guy. He's getting it. He's really taking it. And all of the bodies down below while Conan is still just swinging his axe around. That's just like an aspect of his art that's terrifying yet beautiful at the same time. I think that's the best way to describe it. You guys, I used this picture for announcing that I was doing Mr. Smith, because initially for some reason when I looked up Barry Windsor-Smith, I wasn't getting any photographs of him, which I found very strange. So I just used this picture instead, which is very beautiful in my eyes. That's why I'm so drawn to his art style, because it is beautiful in its own way. And I believe I have this Pathway to Fantasy issue. I think I do. And I have one of the Epic Fantasy magazines too, with one of his covers. Or here we go. Another Conan. This one, I'm guessing this is one in his earlier in his career, because it does look very different from the Conan we see later on. But still, like I said, it's beautiful yet brutal. Oh, this is another one I've seen before. So, I don't think this is Conan, because the character has like a bubble over his head. I think that's a... Oh, no, wait. I think that's a flower. I don't know what that is. But still, looks very nice. Very pleasing to the eye. Let's see if we can get some shots of monsters for you guys to see. Come on. There's gotta be at least one in here. Alright, some Weapon X up there. Okay, I know it's here. Yeah, he produced a lot of art. Which I don't know how he's able to produce so much, considering how detailed his artwork is. Alright, there we go. So, this is the scene where Bobby's mom is trying to save him from the father. And it's a very horrifying scene. Let's see if I could get a better image of it, because the father... Okay, long story short, the father went insane during his time in the war, and he got to the point where he started thinking that literally any man who came near his wife was trying to steal his wife away, including his own son. Yeah, and this is like one of the first few pages of the story, and it looks like something straight out of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. It's horrifying. Alright, so enough gushing about the art. How about we get to a video, because I have never even heard him speak before, so this will be interesting. Oh my god. Go away.
Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club. I am I am so excited for this month's book. This is a book that I've been waiting for many years to read. We got a copy of the manuscript here, and I was just like, this is incredible. This is the kind of book that we want to talk about here on the show every time. The book is Monsters, and we are really lucky to be joined by Barry Windsor-Smith right here. Thank you so much, Barry, for taking the time to talk to us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. If there was a tip, a piece of advice, and I don't even mean, the technical advice, but sort of a philosophical thing that you might say to someone about making comics, what might that be?
Save the hardest question till last, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the way you got to end,
Yeah. It's the answer is all over the place. If you want to learn to draw comics, go into the commercial comics and try to draw them better than they're being drawn already. Try to learn how to make characters different from each other so that you can actually call them characters. If you're taking over a series from somebody who's drawn it before, take note of what that person has done, but make the characters your characters. If you want to draw comics that are more personal, thank God we've got some pretty good specialist publishers now.
Yeah.
So you really have to have a fire in the belly to want to draw comics, unless you want to draw them badly, which is a walk in the park.
Yeah. I don't know about a walk in the park, but yes, it's most comics are drawn badly and are not done well.
I'm sure they're enjoying doing it.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Okay, I'm not saying this to be like a sourpuss or to be a contrarian, but I think a lot of art is bad, like a lot of it, and it's not just because whatever. It's just not everyone has the eye for art. Not everyone has the talent for art. It's sad but true. It is very sad but true. Like, come on. How many deviant art artists are on the website, and how many of them are actually good? It's a very cruel thing to say, but yeah. But I'm sure they had a lot of fun, even if their art wasn't the best. I mean, I remember back in my Italia fandom days where I followed a lot of deviant art artists, and a good chunk of them were crap. But we all had fun, and some of them did improve in their artwork as time went on, but a good chunk of them pretty much just stayed in DeviantArt for just long enough to graduate high school, then they moved on with their lives.
I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. I really, genuinely, from my heart, I appreciate the fact that you were willing to make this time for us.
I thank you very much, Brian.
Yeah, hopefully this has been an enjoyable conversation for you.
It's been pretty good.
Yeah, we really like your work, and I.
Okay, so this was supposed to be at the
able...
end of the. All right. So the original interview is an hour and a half long, which I don't think we're going to have a whole lot of time to get through. So here we go. Let's do this before we get into that. So I found this website called barrywindsorsmith.com/studio/interviews. So it looks like this has a bunch of interviews here for us to pick from. So I'm picking this one because it has a kind of a cool title, Art or Rock. Alright, a visit to Windsor-Smith's studio. And they got the cute little web pages there. Alright, article and interview by Valerie Jones, published in Submedia number 1, 1990. Or 1999. Sorry. Alright, Barry Windsor-Smith works in a fairy tale village, a little slice of colonial heaven, in a bright yellow building with red shutters. It's so bucolic, one can almost forget the huge globes of wet, icy snow and freezing January temperatures. I would only brave this crap for Barry. Not that it's all that difficult for him, but since he has lived in upstate New York for decades, and besides was born in chilly England, where they breed Oscar winners, rock stars, and comic artists. Windsor-Smith is the latter, having arrived on these shores in the age of Aquarius with a dream. After we, meaning myself, Windsor-Smith, and his very nice studio manager, Alex Bailey, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, hydroplane across crystal sidewalks to repair to a lovely French restaurant that is warm and cozy. We replay a few of those early years. Alright. Go to next page. The only big thing you can do in England at the time was be a rock and roller, which was an option for me, but I chose to make comics. I've regretted that for a long time. I wish I had never been so bloody insistent that I wanted to be a comic book artist, because life has been a drag ever since. Of course, if I had gone into music, I'd probably be dead from a drug overdose by now, but at least it wouldn't have been such a drag in the meantime. I'd have had fun, getting smashed and stoned and kicking out rock and roll. Way to go! Instead, I sit around inking bleeding comic book pages. He seems so excited about this. This is the essential Windsor-Smith, a combination of wit, talent, and blunt opinion. He looks like a rock star. He is lanky in jeans and black boots, and smokes incessantly. I dare say he is the comics equivalent of Keith Richards on a good day, Chaplin on a bad one. Not only that, but he plays the guitar, and his rock musical tastes run from Jimi Hendrix to Cat Stevens. Cat Stevens. To make matters even more eccentric, Windsor-Smith now lives on a bizarre schedule wherein he begins his day at 1 o'clock in the morning and hits the sack around 7 p.m., which is midnight in his native London. He living in British time. You can take the man out of Mother England, but you can't change his internal time clock. I wonder if they left any treasure behind. Back in 1968, Barry Smith, he added the Windsor later as a tribute to his mom, Elena Windsor. Oh, I wondered about that. I assumed he took on a wife's name or something. Came to America and headed for the top company of the time, Marvel Comics. Enduring a number of adventures eluding INS officials and sleeping in the 1960s notoriously dangerous Central Park, he secured assignments writing and drawing X-Men number 53, scripted by Arnold Drake, Nick Fury, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. number 12, scripted by Steve Parkhouse, Daredevil number 50 through 52, script by Roy Thomas, and a slew of Kirby-esque covers for Spider-Man, Captain Marvel, Sergeant Fury, and others. After being booted back to merry old England by the U.S. immigration authorities, Windsor-Smith drew 2 issues of The Avengers and some short stories for Marvel's horror line. Those are probably worth a fortune now. Then, in 1970, he received his first shot at a long-term commitment on Conan the Barbarian, originally created by Robert E. Howard. Here he shined, even though the art was sometimes immature and stiff. Wherein a short time, however, Windsor-Smith had not only received acclaim for his work on Conan, including the seminal Red Nails, but for his romantic symbolist work through the Gormley Press, formed in 1974. With Gormley, I hope I am pronouncing that correctly, Windsor-Smith chucked his comic style and created densely lyrical art prints. These visionary works kept him busy on and off for over 10 years, and the output is legendary among collectors. Alright, Barry Windsor-Smith. Gorblimey. Gorblimey? Okay, so that was the Gorblimey stuff. Alright. I wonder how long this, In the early 1980s, he turned his attention back to comics with Machine Man, X-Men, Iron Man, and other titles, including single-handedly created Weapon X, now considered a true Marvel classic. This period was the beginning of Windsor-Smith's transformation from artist to sole author. As a writer/artist, creating some of the finest work in the genre as ever seen in the 1990s, he produced work for Valiant, Archer and Armstrong, Solar, Eternal Warrior, Malibu, Rune, and Image Wildstorm Rising, culminating in Barry Windsor-Smith's Storyteller, the comics magazine featuring 3 separate storylines that Windsor-Smith conceived, wrote, drew, inked, colored, and edited. It was published by Dark Horse for 9 issues until relations between the company and Windsor-Smith Studio grew so strained that he broke off the partnership. Okay, now I am curious. eBay. Let's see what eBay has. Okay. Storyteller. Oh, $60. Oh, that's not bad. Set 2 to 9. So the first issue is probably expensive. Oh well, I'll look into that a little bit later. The comics magazine. Now he looks at 1999 and beyond with 3 new projects, all of which are closer to his heart than anything previous. Monsters is a black and white graphic novel that deals with lingering psychological effects of Nazi biogenic engineering and social mores and values in post-World War II America. It is the most complicated work the artist has ever produced and is written in terms of complexity and depth more as a novel than its graphic counterparts. Astrada in Africa revives a work from 1987, originally produced by Barry Windsor-Smith as the 3rd life-death saga for Marvel's Uncanny X-Men. The story's lead character, Storm, Ororo, has been replaced by Storyteller's young god's rising star, Princess Astrada, but now published by Fangraphics, who are also producing collections of his body of work published as Barry Windsor-Smith Opus. Okay. Alright. Alright, how long is this thing? I just want to make sure this isn't super long. Okay, this is a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. Okay, so... Alright, instead of going through all of this. I'll just put a link for this article in the description, and you guys can read through it for yourself if you want to. Alright, so yeah, I'll put a link for this in the description. But my eye was drawn to this comic book artist spotlight, so I figured we'd give this a chance.
Hello everyone, I would like to welcome you to my channel, Crime Alley Comics, and we are doing episode 43 tonight of the Comic Book Artist Spotlight. You can join me every Wednesday night for another Comic Book Artist Spotlight and learn about your favorite artists and even artists that you may not know anything about. So we will get started tonight. We're talking about Barry Windsor-Smith. Barry Windsor-Smith was born Barry Smith on May the 25th of 1949. He is a British comic book illustrator and painter whose best known work...
this isn't an interview. All right. Okay. All right. Alright, so... Alright. The studio, Jeffrey Jones. Okay, so... Comic Club. Ithaca. I've got a couple of different artists here.
And don't whistle. Go to Smith.
My immediate left, Mike Kaluta, first comic book artist of Shadow, most recently Starstruck from Epic. Bart. Oh, good morning. So we have Barry Windsor-Smith, recently in X-Men. Jeff Jones, is syndicated strip Idol, heavy metal, and of course Bernie Wrightson, co-creator of The Swamp Thing, and recently illustrated Stephen King literature. Also has a graphic novel Cookie coming out, Spider-Man. We're open to questions now from the audience.
Wait a minute. Is that it? Oh, just some questions?
Yeah, questions.
Like 3 questions out there. I don't know where you guys got that gum.
There you go. Perhaps we should start off with someone telling perhaps how the studio arrangement got together.
There's 4 different stories.
Here. We're here for an hour, so just go with it.
Well, we were all once a band of police. So we decided to pool our resources and tie it out together. That's my story. I have another story. My story is I don't know these guys. Has anyone here ever been to New York City? Well, that's not a bad room. All right. Not that far away. Well, it's a big place. And a lot of streets look identical to each other.
Okay, so looks like that's just more of a group interview. Oh, damn, I thought we would find more. I thought there was more there. Oh well. Alright. Cartoonist. Oh! Oh, this is sad. Cartoonist kayfabe. For those who don't know, Ed Piskor was one of the hosts of Cartoonist Kayfabe, who unfortunately took his own life last year due to allegations lobbed his way. All right. Alright, come on, there's gotta be something. No, we don't want more Ellen Moore. Alright, you know what? We'll go back up to that hour-long interview up there. Or hour-and-a-half long interview. And we'll just see how far we can get into this before our time is up. Because I thought we would get a lot more of speaking interviews with Barry Windsor-Smith since, you know, he's still alive.
Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club. I am so excited for this month's book. This is a book that I've been waiting for many years to read. We got a copy of the manuscript here, and I was just like, this is incredible. This is the kind of book that we want to talk about here. On the show every time. The book is Monsters, and we are really lucky to be joined by Barry Windsor-Smith right here. Thank you so much, Barry, for taking the time to talk to us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. The first question I always ask on these interviews, and it really kind of gets to the heart of it for me, is why comics? You're clearly an artist of great craft. You could almost certainly be doing anything you wanted to. What is it about the form of comics, the medium of comics, that speaks to you above everything else?
I have to admit that I rather sometimes wish that I hadn't taken that path, that I'm not doing comics. I had different choices of things to do when I was much younger, and I chose comics. Well, I just chose comics. I enjoyed drawing the human figure, even as a child, and I was influenced by American comics, along with Michelangelo and other more prominent artists. And I kind of got into comics rather than it having to be my lifestyle or something like that. But it's been a long, hard slog since the 1960s. So in many ways, I think I could have found an easier job or an easier thing to do.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem particularly happy with the fact that he was in comics.
I can certainly see that. What is it about comics that speaks to you? What attracted you to it in the first place?
What
attracted you to it in the first place?
What attracted me?
Yeah.
Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
He was the. I was getting American comics they were being sent to England in the 60s, very early 60s, and they were DC comics. My picture just disappeared. Is it supposed to do that?
Yeah, no, you're fine. I can hear you fine.
Okay. And I had grown out of comics. I liked Carmen Infantino and Gil Kane, but the stories were. I had outgrown the stories.
Sure.
They seemed very silly to me, very paltry, and that should have been around the time that I'd have left comics entirely, and I'd have gone elsewhere. I was in art school, learning new crafts and new things, but then Jack Kirby came along. Well, he'd been along all the time, but the Marvel Comics were distributing in England now, or in London at any rate, and it was Jack Kirby who inspired me to want to be able to produce wonderful stories and draw the human figure and draw fantasy.
Yeah.
I think he just really liked art. And he kind of sort of stumbled into comics because he used to like them, but then he kind of fell out of favor with them a little bit. But then it's like, you know what? I still want to make like really cool stories, and I still want to draw really cool characters, so I guess I'll keep on this. It kind of matches up with his the previous answer to the interview we saw, where he's like, I could have gone through so many other things, but of course I picked comics. And it's like, well, clearly you liked it enough to keep doing it for all these years.
And at that time, the only kind of comics fantasy that I could see was Jack Kirby. So I actually started drawing like Jack Kirby rather badly.
Right.
But
yeah, Barry Windsor-Smith's style does not jive well with the Kirby style at all.
But that couldn't have lasted, even though Marvel was very happy to have somebody who kind of drew like Jack Kirby. But I had to change within a year, or within 6 months even. I was no longer drawing like Jack Kirby.
Yeah, yeah. You started, as I understand it, that it was fanzine art that got you started on drawing the Marvel stuff.
Fanzine art.
It was a fanzine. It was like a local.
No, I didn't really do anything in fanzines.
I thought there's some covers that you did for an English.
There was a British publishing company who were publishing Marvel comics in black and white.
I see. Okay, I'm sorry.
And I did back covers for them.
Okay.
Of the Marvel characters.
Yeah.
I was actually in art school at the time, and me and all my friends, we didn't have any money at all. You know, we were typical starving artists.
Yeah.
But I was actually getting paid to draw these back covers. I forget how much it was now, but it seemed like a fortune at the time. So it was great. Yeah. So I did that for quite a long time.
Classic story of a starving artist. Getting any job you can, and whatever you get, it seems like luxury.
Yeah. I'm imagining that your college. They didn't teach you comics. That was never even a thought, right? To the illustration classes that you were taking.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
When the college classes that you were taking,
the college courses, yes.
Yeah, right. They were focused on illustration, but they didn't think of
there's
a valid way of doing
nothing about comics whatsoever.
Yeah.
Certainly not American comics as well.
Yeah, comic art. It's less nowadays, obviously, because comics have gained much more of a reputation. But even nowadays, depending on which college you go to, comic art is still not seen as something worth dedicating your time to, unless you're going to a very specific cartooning or comic book college.
Because it was just an unknown thing. I took illustration for 2 years, but there was no options for cartooning or anything like that.
Yeah. The way I hear it is that you got a letter or something from Stan Lee, and then you decided that meant that you could fly to New York and
enter the country illegally, sleep in Central Park, then get deported. Probably should have thought that plan through a little more.
No, I sent a bunch of stuff to Marvel, sort of on speculation.
Right.
A couple of stories that I wrote, very, very Kirby-esque. And I guess they were pretty impressed, considering I was like 18 years old. You know? And I got a, what's it called? I got a thing back from Roy Thomas. It wasn't a letter, it was a, that thing when he uses.
Not a rejection slip, or
what again?
It was not a rejection slip, obviously.
No, it's a form of sending. Of course, we don't use it anymore. It's so silly that I can't remember it. Telegram. I got a telegram.
A telegram. Oh wow, yeah. Wow.
Back from Roy Thomas.
Yeah.
Wait, telegrams went that old? Hold on. Now I'm curious. Bye, Conan. Telegraph dates only from... That does not tell me anything. Alright, few remaining telegraph applications are likely to take over. Okay, so it went into decline in the 1920s, but I guess it was still like kind of sort of around. That's interesting.
And you know how it is with telegrams, you like abbreviate all the sentences, you know. So it was a very abbreviated thing, where he said something like, got your stuff, love it, stop, keep going, stop, don't stop. It was good, and that was enough for me. That made me that I was thrilled by that. Also, there was a lady working at Marvel, Linda Fite, who actually wrote me a letter based upon the material that I sent in. And she said, you know, in the typical way that people say things, if you're ever around, stop by, you know.
Right.
And so, well, I was in the East End of London, so I made it clear that I'd be around. And I and a friend of mine, Steve Parkhouse, we flew to New York, I think in early summer of 1968.
Yeah. Wow. How did you afford to fly to London from London to New York?
I sold all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
We got help from friends.
Yeah.
It wasn't that as expensive then as it is now. I can't recall what we paid.
It's probably $60 just for some airfare. Whereas nowadays you gotta cough up like $1,000 just to fly from Columbus to frickin' Florida.
But and there was a limit on how much money one could take out of Britain at the time. It was only £50, which was about $60. I don't know what that was all about, but that was the law. So we ran out, once we got to New York, we ran out of money pretty quickly. And we spent some days being very hungry and all sorts of things like that.
Wow. That's really amazing and bold that you took that step to get that work.
In the time that it took.
Brave, but probably should have thought through that plan a little better.
To gather money together to buy tickets, I drew 2 new stories, short stories, both 5 pages long. Drew them and inked them, wrote them, of course, and Steve lettered them. He was a very good letterer. So when we got there to New York, and it was a dreadful summer, it was so hot. We had never experienced heat like that before.
Wow.
That reminds me of that video of the English girl who was trying to make an argument that English summers were unbearable and us Americans would never understand because it gets to like 75 degrees. And Americans all the way over here were just laughing our butts off at her. Though I have heard that New York in the summertime is brutal, not just because of like it's summertime, but also because of like the blacktops, the pavement. It just radiates heat and it makes everything so much worse. But listening to a story now and thinking about it does check out because back in the day, there was no working long distance. There was no, just send in the art when you can through the mail. A lot of comic book companies, they kind of wanted you to be in the city that you were working in. It was kind of a requirement that you be in that city. So it doesn't sound so crazy when you look at it that way, where back in the day you had to be in the city in order to get the job. Whereas nowadays you could just like send it electronically and you're fine. Still probably should have come up with a better game plan, though.
It was just nightmarish because we had no place to stay, and we'd be out in the sun, and there was no water to drink or anything like that. It was really a wonder that we actually got through, that we made it. But we stayed at a hotel, which was far too expensive. We didn't know. We didn't understand dollars and cents. So we didn't know that we were kind of wasting our money. But I guess it was within 3 days that Steve and I went to Marvel Comics' office, which was at 625 Madison Avenue at the time. No, I think it was at 635 Madison Avenue. And just knocked on the door.
Yeah.
And I think Linda Fight opened it, actually. Because she was a secretary. She happened to be sitting right by the door. And we said, I'm Barry, this is Steve. Come in. And it's like that.
Wow. That's amazing. Not only that happened, but that you had the balls to do that. I don't know.
He just walked right up to the place and be like, can I have a job, please?
Just so, I mean, as I say, I was 18, so I didn't think anything could harm me, you know?
Sure.
You know how you are when you're 18,
Yeah. I do fondly remember that. Yeah. So who actually ended up meeting with you? Was it Roy? Was it you didn't get in to see Stan?
It was Roy largely. Yeah. I met Stan on that first day, as did Steve. And what a charming man. He really sort of made us feel at home, you know. And we sat in his office, and he just talked about how he loves his wife was English, and he had an affinity for England, And
oh my God, another Brit-a-boo.
He was just talking about England and how much he enjoyed the English people. And he said he felt like he was talking to the Beatles, talking to Stephen. So we immediately put on our Liverpudlian accents. Just to, I do a pretty good George.
Yeah.
And then we spoke to Roy, who was, I don't know, I guess he was the head writer at that time, the second in command or something like that. And, and we went around the offices meeting everybody. It was really like a royal tour,
Yeah. So how did that translate into getting to getting a page assignment, though? Did you walk out that day with a story assignment, or
no? Roy has Roy's got a different version of this story, and I've always resented it.
Oh.
We'd been there for a couple of hours. It was like well into the afternoon, and he said, this was on a Friday, by the way, and he said, have you ever met Roy?
I've never met Roy, no.
He speaks very fast.
Yeah.
And you really have to try to catch up with him. And I wasn't used to his American accent. So it was a bit of a deal. And I was talking very, very Londonese in those days. I don't talk Londonese anymore because people wouldn't understand me. Yeah. So we were sort of going back and forth, not quite understanding each other. But he said, by and large, I'll see if I can find some time this weekend to work up a plot for the X-Men. The X-Men in particular, because it was a dying book. It was about to be cancelled.
Yeah.
It is very weird that even back then there was a time where the X-Men were not doing too well. But then again, before Alan Moore took over, Swamp Thing was about to be canceled too, because its sales numbers were abysmal, though abysmal by 1980s or even 1970s standard would be really fantastic nowadays.
And so I said, okay, great, thank you. And that was that. As Steve and I were walking back down Madison Avenue, I came up with a story, as I have a want to do. This is what I've been doing all my life since I was a kid. So I was just bouncing it off of Steve. It wasn't much of a plot. It just included Blastar, the Kirby villain, who had really impressed me. He'd only been introduced about 6 months beforehand. But it was so Kirby-esque, this sort of hairy guy who just blasts his way through things, not for any particular reason, just because he's a Blastar. That's because his name,
Because his name, yeah.
You have to blast things. So I had him traveling through the some kind of cosmic portal and ending up in the X-Men's place of business. And there was a typical Kirby type fight ensued, and then he gets away. It was only about 16 pages, but I liked it. It sounded great to me. It was super simplistic, but I was pretty simplistic myself at the time. So with paper that Linda Fight had given us, that weekend I drew the entire story.
Wow.
In pencil only.
What was he taking to get through all that?
I was very fast in those days. And any problems with the plot, I just worked out as I was going along. My drawing was a little bit cack-handed. It was published as X-Men 53.
Yeah.
The Rage of Blastar. And so Roy still claims that he wrote a story for me, that he wrote the Rage of Blastar, but it's not true. I did it myself.
Well, that's scummy.
And we took
That's very scummy of him.
Story in on Monday, to show to Roy, but he wasn't in on Monday. He only came in on Tuesdays. Or he began his week on Tuesday. And so we just left. We were somewhat disappointed. So we just left the work there. Steve had written up a script. Had to do it by hand. We didn't have a typewriter. So we left it there on his desk. And we went back in on Tuesday. And I mean, I was really hoping that Roy was going to be so impressed that, this 18-year-old kid turns up and he just writes stories.
Yeah.
I mean, what it is usually is that the fans turn up and they've got a drawing or two, sort of like pin-ups of Mr. Fantastic or whatever. But I wasn't doing that. I was actually creating stories. Because that was my thing, and he came out from wherever he was in the back room, and I said, "So did you see our story?" I'm all excited, and he said, "Yes, it's got a few problems," and I went, "Oh crikey, really?"
Oh.
Like. I mean, I knew it had problems. I mean, it was drawn in 2 days.
Right.
But he just wasn't nice enough to say, "Yeah, you did such a great job. It's got some problems, but we can work that out." He said nothing congratulatory at all. Didn't even mention, that I did it so fast and I did it quite well. He was just pointing out the problems that it had, so I was somewhat disappointed in that. But he still claims that he wrote that story, which he didn't.
But on the other hand, I mean,
what? Oh my gosh, to go through all that to criticize the guy's work, and then you just go ahead and slap your name on it anyways. That is very silly. Oh my gosh. But I think we're going to leave that interview there. I don't want to go through the whole interview, mostly because we don't have the time. But it seems like those interviews would have been too long anyway. This interview would have been too long anyway. And doesn't seem to be very much interviewee material, unless we can find something else that's somewhat shorter. Alright, this one? Storyteller. Okay, so this is just like the website of all of this stuff. Alright. So, never mind. But that does look like a cool website. Oh. 1 second. I'm just about to finish up the stream and then we'll be golden.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Alright. In a minute, I'll be there. Alright, so that is my boyfriend that just got here. Kind of looks like it's not like we're out of material, it just seems like the material that I had to work with is a lot longer than I expected it to be. But I will put links to the interviews down below for you guys to read for yourselves. And I think we'll call it a night, a little short tonight, even though technically this is longer than most of my usual streams. But if you liked the stream, please give a like, leave a comment of what you think. If you want to keep up with what I'm doing, I have an X account. You can find me at, no, stop it, Heather_Veely, and I'll usually post a poll of who you guys want me to cover next, but I think next week I'm just going to pick an artist myself, because you guys had it your way for the last few times, so now we're going to do it my way. Ha! But anyways, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a good evening. Bye!